saying, well, if this is an elimination game, every game in the SEC is an elimination game. You know, everybody that has a loss, everybody that has 2 losses, everybody that plays each other, it's an elimination game. So we can kind of like put that to rest. This is really about each team in the SEC knows where they're at, right? I mean, the record speaks for itself. This is about you need to play your very best when your best is needed.
Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Appreciate you guys being with us today. I am live. Well, not technically live, but as at the time we're recording this episode, I am in the Atlanta airport. I am currently posted up at a Minute Suites, so you can go ahead and check this box. This is one of the more unique places I've done our podcast here at Always College Football, but I'm here because we have a massive weekend of college football to take in. The problem is with flight challenges, I'm not going to be able to get home tonight in a timely enough manner to do the show from my normal studio, or AKA my office. So I appreciate you guys putting up with me. And if you really like the nice backdrop that we have here at the Minute Suites, then by all means, maybe I'll adjust my backdrop at home. Doesn't matter either way. We're talking ball today. We're preparing you for what should be an excellent week 11 of college football. There's 2 matchups that really stand out above all else. They're both in the SEC, so we'll hit those hard off the top. You probably already know where we're going with that. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on a handful of other matchups that we find pretty intriguing heading into this weekend. So it's not going to be your traditional 5 or 6 good questions on each matchup. It's going to be really 2 deep dives, and then we're going to hit a few more games after the original break. So let's dive in and let's kick it off by diving into Georgia at Ole Miss and what is a playoff game for one, but maybe not so much for the other. Number 2, Georgia is at number 16, Ole Miss. Georgia right now about a 2.5-point favorite. The total is 54.5. This game's 3:30 Eastern time on ABC. This is an elimination game for Ole Miss. They've lost the opportunity to have do-overs by losing to Kentucky in just a shocking game at home, especially looking at where Kentucky's gone since, and then losing to LSU a couple weeks ago, a game in which they had the lead in the fourth quarter and really never trailed in the game, not for one moment until the final play in overtime. Either way, in the event in which Ole Miss loses, their playoff chances dip to under 1% according to the All-State playoff predictor. So as much as you want to rip on the All-State playoff predictor or not, I think they got this one entirely right. Ole Miss loses, they're out, unless absolute chaos occurs just about everywhere else. The Rebels have 1 win all time against an AP top 2 football team. That was in 2015 against number 2 Alabama. Question number 1. Will Trey Harris be available for Ole Miss? And does it matter? Now, it says an awful lot about your receiving core and the depth of your receiving core when you are without arguably the best wide receiver in the country, or at least the most productive wide receiver in the country, and your offense doesn't suffer massively in the absence of that receiver. Now, Trey Harris is a big, physically imposing specimen out on the outside. He's an amazing player, and I don't think anybody was as impactful in the first 7 games of the season as Trey Harris. Look at the numbers. They reflect that. He's been sidelined for the last 2 weeks, and the numbers are not outrageous because he's still like 3rd or 4th in the country as far as receiving yards and missed multiple games. So looking at what he does is pretty amazing. The thing I think is fascinating about it, there's a guy that averages 141 yards a game. That's the most in college football. But I do think that sometimes when you have a bona fide alpha dog at wide receiver, the quarterback, Jackson Dart, I think sometimes, and I've been in this situation, like I played with Julio Jones, and sometimes when bells and whistles were going off, my eyes would just naturally look in the direction of Julio Jones. Now, if Julio Jones was for whatever reason not on the field, I went through my progression and I didn't try to force feed my alpha dog. And I get the sense sometimes, especially with the target distribution in the first 6-7 games of the year, they almost always were looking in the direction of Trey Harris. Like when it was close, it was Trey Harris all the time. Well, now the whole world's opened up, and I think they will benefit from his absence long term. We've seen the emergence of Jordan Watkins, one of the most underrated players in the SEC. And I think people kind of forgot what he was capable of until last week. Goes for 5 touchdowns. Caden Lee in the slot's amazing. Juice Wells is still there, even though he hasn't been what we thought he might be coming into the season. I think they have 2 guys at tight end that can be really impactful as well. So having a great receiver is a blessing and a curse. So if Harris is there, great. If he's not there, we've already proven that we can overcome his absence collectively as a wide receiver room. Question number 2, can Ole Miss's defensive line impact Carson Beck? Now, Beck has to understand that this is a defensive front that is outstanding. They lead the country in sacks. They're among the highest in the country as far as pressure rate. They're among the highest in the country as far as pressures created. And when you look at Carson Beck and you look at his numbers, let's just look last week against Florida, right? Because this is coming out of a bye week. Carson now has had a chance to kind of evaluate where he's at, evaluate what he needs to do to improve his processing. And first opportunity out the gate against Florida, he's pressured on 11 dropbacks. He goes 2 for 11 for 29 yards and throws 3 picks. When he was not pressured against Florida, he was 23 of 29 for 280, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. So his QBR last week, when not pressured, 94. Remember, this is a scale from 0 to 100. Pretty good, right? 94 out of 100, we'll take that. In math class, that's a lock. But when he was pressured, his QBR dropped to 0.0. That's like the GPA in Animal House. Not what you're looking for. So, doesn't happen often. He doesn't get pressured a lot, but when he does, his numbers drop drastically. And I think a lot of people want to talk about the interceptions, and that's understandable, but the occasional lack of poise is what's really concerning from a guy that's in his 5th year of college football. Question number 3, will Georgia be able to run the football? Last year, Georgia ran for 300 yards against Ole Miss on 35 attempts. That's 8.6 yards per carry. That was last year's version of Georgia. It was also last year's version of Ole Miss. Now, this year's version of Georgia, 97th in rushing yards a game, and Ole Miss is 2nd in rush defense. So, 2 teams that have kind of gone in different directions. Georgia not nearly as committed to the run, partly because their offensive line has had some guys out of the lineup, and an Ole Miss defense that at times had given up a lot of chunk yardage on the ground in recent years, but they've really committed to that by really improving their personnel in the front 7 defensively. Now, I also look at where the Rebels are as far as yards per carry. They're among the best, 2.3 yards per carry. So expect a heavy dose of ETN in the event in which ETN is back at 100% off the rib injury last week, assuming he will be. Heavy dose of him. Heavy dose of Frazier, who appears to be getting back in the good graces of the coaching staff. And I think there's going to be the occasional run by Carson Beck, who has a tendency and a knack for having 3 to 4 runs a game that extend drives. Question number 4, will Jackson Dart be able to take the top off the defense? As far as explosive plays this year, Ole Miss is one of the best. Now, part of these numbers, remember, they were inflated by a really manageable non-conference schedule. But Ole Miss, as far as 10-yard runs and 20-yard passes, 111 explosive plays. It's the 2nd most in the country behind Miami. Georgia, on the other hand, defensively, they've given up just 43 explosive plays. That's the 6th fewest in the FBS. Now, one other thing that Georgia's amazing at, and I love how their defense tackles. They've always been really good in that area, but it does feel like this year they're even better than they've been. They've given up just 584 yards after the catch this year. That's the 4th lowest allowed in the FBS. So if you're going to hit Georgia through the air, it's probably not going to be on catch and runs. It's probably not going to be on screens. It's probably going to be down the field. because they don't allow many yards after catch because the coverage is tight and they do a great job of getting your ball carriers on the ground. And question number 5, will penalties be Ole Miss's Achilles heel yet again? The story has been pretty much the same for Ole Miss all season long. 77 penalties, that's 131st. 28 have come on defense. 27 of those 28 penalties have resulted in first downs for the opposition. That's the most in the Power Four. That's 131st overall in college football. So to give the opposing offense 27 first downs is of huge concern. And it led to them losing the game against Kentucky. And it is factored in at multiple other times when the defense just seemingly had bad technique. Hopefully they can get things righted this week, but it will be tough because I love what Georgia has on offense at wide receiver. I still think it's an underrated group, and I still think Carson Beck's best game is in there at some point. He's just got to start seeing the field a little bit better. A couple trends here. I look at this game, and this feels like the one that's been circled for Ole Miss for quite a while. Lane Kiffin went out in the offseason, signed a bunch of people in the portal, and said, you know what? We want to be like Georgia. We want to look like Georgia. We need personnel that could play at Georgia. They have long struggled to get those people. They have them now. Will they now step up and actually play well in a big game with so much on the line? Because they have not done that very much in their history. Against the likes of Bama, against the likes of Georgia, they've struggled. And in games like this, it has not been friendly for Ole Miss in the Lane Kiffin era. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath on ABC at 3:30. So come check it out. We'll move into the nightcap for the ABC doubleheader. They have a triple header, but the two big games are at 3:30 and in the nightcap at 7:30. It's the 11th ranked Alabama Crimson Tide taking on their bitter rival in one of the best environments and the best scenes in college football. It's the LSU Tigers. Alabama is currently a 2.5 point favorite. The total is around 58. This game will kick off 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Nobody in college football has more national championships since 2000 than these two programs. Alabama has 6. LSU has 3. The amazing thing about LSU is that all 3 come with 3 different head coaches. Brian Kelly, I think he might at some point. I think he might get one for himself for sure. It wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. That's the one thing missing from his Hall of Fame. He's in the Hall of Fame, or he's going to be if he's not already. But to sweeten it just a little bit more, a national championship at LSU would push him over the top, and history would tell you he's probably going to win one. Alabama's won 11 of the last 13 meetings against LSU starting in 2012. That was in January of 2012, so early 2012. That was the BCS National Championship game, but they have split the last 2 meetings. And the last time they played, it was a bit of a track meet. Jaden Daniels got hurt. Bama won that game 42-28. But in 2022, it came down to the wire final play. Mason Taylor for LSU in the front corner of the end zone for the 2-point conversion and the outright victory. Both teams entered this game with 2 losses. It's the first time since 2006 that both teams enter with multiple losses. And there's been 5 games in this series that have gone into overtime. It's the most of any series in the FBS since overtime was introduced in 1996. It's going to be amazing. I love this game. It's one of my favorites on the college football calendar, so I hope you're as excited as I am. Question number 1, can Alabama's pass rush have an effect on Garrett Nussmeier? Now, Alabama gets pressure on about 34% of their opponents' dropbacks. It's about 70th. Alabama doesn't really blitz very often. And against the Power Four, it's pretty rare. I mean, the numbers are up slightly than when comparing it to the non-conference teams, but against the Power Four, the numbers just aren't that high. I mean, it's about 17% in that vicinity. That's 118th. Now, everybody looks at LSU's offensive line, and they know that the left tackle, Will Campbell, is outstanding, especially in pass protection. All right, he's amazing. So you look at the rest of the group. It's like, all right, where can I attack this offensive line? And guess what? There's not many places. It's a really good group across the board. The right tackle, Emory Jones, has been a little up and down this year. The center, DJ Chester, is probably the guy that you might want to take the most advantage of. He's the youngest. He's played the least. and he's probably been the most inconsistent. But they will also be without their left guard in this game, Garrett Dellinger. So Garrett Dellinger not being available and the center maybe struggling a little bit at times, that might be where Alabama tries to attack. Now, Garrett Nussmeier's been sacked 4 times this year. That's the second fewest in the FBS behind Army. So I don't anticipate Alabama's pass rush being able to get home with great regularity. So if Alabama's pass rush can't get home, can Alabama match up with these wide receivers? Kyron Lacey against Domani Jackson. That's going to be a fascinating matchup. Aaron Anderson in the slot, who I love, by the way. Aaron Anderson in the slot's a fantastic football player and has gotten better and better and better as the season went along against Devontae Smith. That might be the biggest matchup in the passing game. Mason Taylor against Bama's linebackers and safeties. We'll be watching that position group very close to see who draws the unenviable task of slowing down Mason Taylor, even though it does sound like he's a little banged up right now. Either way, this is a deep receiving core. This is a versatile receiving core, and this is a receiving core that can take over the game if you let it. Question number 2, will LSU find some balance offensively? This has been a real question mark for a while now. But I think there's 2 schools of thought here when it comes to LSU's rushing attack. I personally believe that there is a can't and there is a haven't when it comes to evaluating teams at this point of the season. I am not willing to say that LSU can't run the football. I think they can. But I do think I'm very comfortable saying that LSU hasn't run the football. So statistically, if you look at LSU's rushing numbers, you'd say, yeah, they can't do it. I mean, they're just not a very good football team running it. And I look at them and I say, they just haven't done it. You look at their rushing offense, and it accounts for 26% of their yardage output. That is 128th in college football. But I look at their running back situation, and at first, coming into the season, it was a little bit difficult to kind of figure out, all right, what's the pecking order going to be? Like, are we really going to rely on a true freshman? Like, what are we going to do with that position? Well, when Caden Durham's been out there and he's been at 100%, they've been a very different looking outfit when it comes to running the football. You look at what he did against South Carolina. You look at what he did against Arkansas. He really killed both those teams. And you look at what he did against A&M, and he had 11 carries for 15 yards. So if Caden Durham can create some space and Caden Durham can take some of the pressure off the passing attack, that could be massive for LSU because they've gotten way too one-dimensional. And I think now coming out of the bye week, we're going to see an LSU offense that strives to create just a little bit more balance. I'm not saying they're going to be 50-50, but right now they're 74-26. If they can just be 60-40, you'd feel pretty good about how their offense might be able to maneuver their way down the field. Question number 3, can LSU defend the run? More specifically, the quarterback run. Now, LSU's played 2 guys that are really dynamic. One is Lenora Sellers at South Carolina. One is Marcel Reed. And LSU on quarterback run game this year is among the SEC's worst defenses. They're giving up 6.5 yards a carry. That's the worst in the SEC. These are on quarterback designed runs. So just so you understand, quarterback designed runs and scrambles. They give up 6.5 yards a carry. That's the worst in the SEC. They've given up 5 rushing touchdowns. That's second worst in the SEC. They've given up a long run of 75 yards. That was against Lenora Sellers. That was the longest run given up by an SEC defense this year to a quarterback. And they're giving up about 10% of the quarterback run game has resulted in touchdowns. That's the second worst touchdown percentage rush. So their raw quarterback rushing numbers this year, 51 carries for 329. And then you look at what's on the opposite side of the field, and it's Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is super dynamic. And while he hasn't run the ball with great effectiveness the last couple weeks, it's in there. He's always got the capability of taking off and making you wrong in the run game. Last year, he went excluding sacks. If you exclude sacks from last year's ball game, he had 4 rushing touchdowns. He had 18 carries. and he had 167 yards. So 9 of those 18 carries went for a first down or touchdown. So there were a lot of big runs that were ripped off by Jalen Milroe in the performance. So this is something that has been problematic for LSU this year, and it was also something that was problematic for LSU last year in this matchup. Question 4, can Alabama create some turnovers against Garrett Nussmeier? Now, we haven't really talked as much about Garrett Nussmeier's turnover woes. We spent, hours talking about Carson Beck's issues throwing interceptions. Well, kind of lost in the shuffle has been Garrett Nussmeier, who now in the last 4 games has quietly thrown 7 interceptions. Now, I think people started to pay attention with the 3 interceptions he threw against Texas A&M, but he also threw 2 against Ole Miss, and he also threw 2 bad interceptions against South Alabama, and that's kind of what started this spiral down to making some inadequate decision making. So can Alabama create some turnovers? They've been pretty good with that this year, and that is a bit of a problem when it comes to Nussmeier. He believes he can throw it into any window, and maybe he shouldn't against a defense that is pretty opportunistic. Let's go next to question number 5. Who will win on third down? LSU has the 10th best third down offensive attack. That's about a 49% conversion rate. Alabama's defense is surprisingly 15th in the FBS. They allow just 31% conversion. Now, Alabama lost the game against Vanderbilt because they couldn't get off the field on third down. So I kind of expected those numbers to be much worse. But if you look since the Vanderbilt game and really the games surrounding the Vanderbilt game, they've been pretty good on third down. Alabama's offense, conversely, is about 61st in the country, about 41% conversion. LSU allows 40% conversion. That's about 80th. So not very good on defense if you're LSU allowing third downs. Here's the key, though. Alabama's just 5 of 38 on third down and 7+. Those 5 conversions, the second lowest in the FBS. Kent State is the only team with fewer this year, and Kent State has yet to win a game this season. So the big key for Alabama to avoid third down and 7+, and the big key for LSU, force Alabama into obvious passing situations where Braden Swinson, Savion Jones, Whit Weeks, they can tee off in the pass rush. And then question number 6, will Death Valley roar? We all know the answer to this. It's Death Valley at night. Are you kidding me? It's going to be an amazing atmosphere, probably as good of an atmosphere as there is in the sport. Neyland and LSU, to me, are the 2 best. I think those are the 2 best atmospheres. When their teams are good, it's hard to beat. LSU has won 15 straight night games at Tiger Stadium. They are 13-0 under Bryant Kelly at night. Its last home loss came in 2021 against Arkansas, and LSU is 17-1 at home overall under Brian Kelly. That one loss came against Tennessee. That was like 11 o'clock kick back in 2022. One other thing, too, just because of the road trip, Alabama's 128th in penalties. They had a bunch against Tennessee, and it clearly affected them. So can they iron that out a little bit? Because it was a problem communicating in what I think is one of, if not the loudest environments in the sport. A couple trends in the game. LSU's 3-1 outright as a home underdog under Brian Kelly, and Alabama is 4-1 against the spread in their last 4 trips to Baton Rouge. I'll take Alabama. I think Alabama's defense is improving significantly. Their young players are growing up. Their perimeter players, I think, are going to be okay in this matchup, but that's where this game might be won and lost. Alabama's secondary against LSU's wide receivers and Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. I think Garrett Nussmeier might throw an interception or 2, and I think Alabama's rushing attack is what ultimately tips the scales in their favor. I think it's going to be awesome. I just think LSU's offense is a bit one-dimensional. I think Bama's a little bit more well-balanced team on both sides of the ball. Purdue is at the second-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State currently a 38-point favorite. The total is 53.5. This game's Saturday, noon Eastern time on Fox. Interesting matchup for the Big Noon Fox window, but I don't know how Purdue keeps this thing close. I just don't. I think Ohio State can name their score. I would take Ohio State. I'd lay the points. I would anticipate Ryan Day trying to flex. I would anticipate a big win in favor of the Buckeyes. Also at noon, this one's on ABC. It's the Florida Gators at the Texas Longhorns. Texas is about a 3-touchdown favorite, 21.5. The total is just under 48 at 47.5. This is actually the first time that Texas and Florida have met since 1940. Which I found interesting enough, especially knowing that we had Colt McCoy on the show a couple weeks ago. And we had asked Colt, hey, Colt, who would you have liked to have played in college if given the opportunity? And he said Florida. Well, that got us thinking, here you go. Texas, Gators, they're in Austin. Unfortunately for Colt, he doesn't have eligibility left, but either way, would have been cool to see that back when Tebow and Colt were both playing great football for both Florida and Texas, respectively. But they haven't played since 1940. Texas is 2-0-1 in the series. It's amazing to me that they've only played each other 3 times. Couple questions here. Number one, will Florida's offense find some success without DJ Lagway? Now, Lagway carted off the field. It was encouraging to know that it was a hamstring, not a knee. That was fired up, but the encouragement was not great after we watched who came on in relief of DJ Lagway, and that was Aiden Warner. He was a walk-on, went 7 of 22 for 66 yards and an interception. The sub 32% completion percentage is the worst by a Florida quarterback in a game since 2000. He's a transfer from Yale. Redshirt his only season there. Hasn't played really that much at Florida, did get in. He had 3 passing attempts prior to last Saturday, but this is not a get-right recipe. I do think the only way to beat Texas is through the air, and I don't know if Florida right now is equipped to do so without DJ Lagway. And then question number 2, will Quinn Ewers get back on track? Now, since returning from injury against Oklahoma, Quinn Ewers has struggled to kind of get back to his pre-injury self. In the 3 games since, he got back on October 12th. He's 81st out of 129 qualified quarterbacks in QBR. So 81st out of 129 here in the last few weeks is just not good enough. He's thrown 4 picks also. So he only had 2 picks in the 3 games prior to the injury. So at some point, though, he's going to have to open things up downfield. I mean, this dink and dunk, catch and run is great against lesser competition. But if Texas wants to get where they want to go, I think they're going to have to open things up and start pushing it down the field a lot more often. They're averaging about 5 yards, 5.5 yards downfield per attempt. That's just not going to be good enough. A couple trends in the game. Florida's 5-0 against the spread in the last 5 games. That's the longest cover streak since 2018. And Texas is 1-4 against the spread in conference play. I'm going to take Texas, but I'm going to take the points here. It's not a very comfortable feeling because at this point, I don't know what I'm going to get from the quarterback spot at Florida, but I think Florida can muddy up the game a little bit. I think they can shorten the game a little bit, so it'll lay north of 3 touchdowns to me. It just feels like way too many points. The 4th-ranked Miami Hurricanes will travel to Atlanta to take on the Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech. Miami is about an 11-point favorite, total 63.5. The game will be played noon Eastern time on ESPN. The all-time series I found interesting. The all-time series being tied at 14, with the Hurricanes holding an 11-8 advantage since joining the ACC. That felt surprising. But then I thought, all right, Paul Johnson, triple option, like they had some good years there for a little while, but my goodness, it just felt like Miami would have a sizable advantage in the historical matchups, right? Now, last year, we all remember last year, Georgia Tech stole a victory from Miami, or you could say Miami gift-wrapped the victory and handed it to Georgia Tech. They won that game 23-20, 44-yard touchdown pass from Haynes King to Christian Leary with about a second left after Miami fumbled trying to run out the clock. Now, Miami's trying to win 10 games for the 8th time in program history, 2nd time since joining the ACC. So big opportunity for Miami. Before we even get into the questions, I just have to know, is Haynes King back for Georgia Tech? Because if Haynes King isn't back, we're almost wasting our time breaking this thing down. Because the Yellow Jackets with Haynes King out of the lineup, they've scored 19 points in the last 2 games. They've lost both games. Now, with Haynes King in the lineup, they're averaging nearly 33 points a game. and nearly 450 yards of offense. So a very different group with the veteran Haynes King under center. But let's operate under the assumption that Haynes King is playing. Number one, can Georgia Tech run the football and create big plays off of it, right? We know that Georgia Tech has speed. They got a lot of speed. They got guys that can run, including Haynes King. Malik Rutherford's great in catch and run situations, screen game, short throws, allowing him to kind of get jet sweeps, you name it. Malik Rutherford's a handful with the ball in his hands, and then Eric Singleton's a guy that can get behind the defense. That complements really solid with a run game that's really, really stingy and that can give you a lot of misdirection. The problem is Miami is top 10 against the run. So will you be able to run the ball enough against Miami? The good news for Georgia Tech is that Miami is 76th in QBR allowed. So they can get beat through the air, but the one thing you can't do against Miami is allow big plays to develop because they've sacked the opposing quarterback 27 times. So going to have to get the ball out quick, going to have to run the ball, going to have to be able to create some misdirection. They can move the pocket a bunch. That will all be helpful for Haynes King and this Georgia Tech offense. Then question 2, can Georgia Tech do anything to contain or affect Cam Ward? Now, Georgia Tech's biggest Achilles last year was their rush defense. But they've improved that side significantly. They're one of the most improved units in the country against the run. Now, the problem is that while they're improved against the run, they have now started to suffer through the air. They also have had a hard time rushing the passer. They're 93rd in pressure rate. They're allowing a 13-2 touchdown to interception ratio, and they are 119th in QBR allowed. So that's not great. When you're also, as a quarterback, not super concerned about getting hit and the opposing team only has 11 sacks, that means that if I'm Cam Ward, I can stay back there for a little while and I'm not super worried about having to get the ball out quick, make quick decisions. I can buy time. I can allow my guys to uncover down the field. And I just have a hard time thinking that Georgia Tech won't get picked apart by Cam Ward and this passing attack that has so many different options and so many different weapons. A couple trends in the game. Miami is 5-1 against the spread as a double-digit favorite this season. And Georgia Tech, traditionally a really good underdog. They're most of the time always a live underdog, especially as a double-digit home underdog. They're 3-0 against the spread, 2-1 straight up as a home underdog this season. Miami's game this year, they have featured 630 points scored by both them and their opponents. It's third most in the country behind New Mexico and Texas Tech. I think Georgia Tech, if Haynes King can play, will score. I expect a high-scoring affair. But I don't think Georgia Tech's going to get nearly as many stops as Miami's going to get, and I think Miami's going to enter this game really ticked off about what went down last year in Coral Gables where they gift-wrapped this one away. I think Miami wins, and I think Miami wins big. Another game in the ACC that probably would have been top billing if not for the outcomes of last week's games. It's Clemson Tigers taking on the Virginia Tech Hokies. This will be from Blacksburg. This will be 3:30 Eastern time on ESPN. Clemson is a 6.5-point favorite. The total is around 53.5. Now the Tigers trying to bounce back. The loss to Louisville stung badly. They've only lost back-to-back conference games 3 times since Dabo Swinney became the head coach back in 2008. 2 of those instances came last season. So we know they've been pretty good in bounce-back situations in the past. Will they be this week? Or was last week a sign of things to come for the Clemson program? Question 1, will Virginia Tech be healthy at quarterback and running back? Because without Kyron Drones, who's got a lower body injury, and without Bashal Tutin, they're going to have some problems. All right, Bashal Tutin was out, had a shoulder injury, missed last week's game. Now, the backups played great. Colin Schlee played great. I think you look at how they were still able to attack Syracuse on the ground. There were still a lot of things to like about what Virginia Tech did offensively. But I think that if Bashal Tutin can go, that's where Virginia Tech might be able to create an advantage. They're a top 25 rushing attack. They're averaging over 200 yards a game. And Tutin's averaging nearly 7 yards per carry. So I look at Clemson's defense, and while traditionally they've been elite against the run, I watched last week's game, and I saw the amount of yards given up to the Louisville rushing attack. Louisville rushing attack, not Louisville. Louisville rushing attack. And I think this rushing attack is more dynamic because I think this quarterback is more dynamic. Now, Kyron Jones doesn't throw it like Tyler Shuck, but you always have to be mindful of him pulling it and making plays by himself with his legs. And if Kyron Jones can't go, guess what? Colin Schlee can run too. So either way, whoever's in there at quarterback, they have a mobile option if you are the Hokies. Can Clemson's offense bounce back is question number 2. Now, I think the big key in this one, while I love Cade Klubnik and the passing attack and how that part of the Clemson offense has grown, is about running the football. And I think Phil Maffa is going to get a heavy dose in this one. He's in top 4 in the ACC in rushing yards. He's 5th in yards per attempt, averaging over 6 yards a carry in his own right. Like, I think he pounds away. And if he can run the football and Clemson can run the football, then it could be a tough day for Virginia Tech, because then the play action comes, then you get one-on-ones, and then you got some problems for sure. A couple trends in the game. Clemson 5-1 against the spread against Virginia Tech under Dabo Swinney, but Virginia Tech is 10-3 against the spread in conference play dating back to last season. I'm taking Virginia Tech, but I am operating under the assumption that Virginia Tech will be at 100%. If Virginia Tech's at 100%, I think they win the game. If Virginia Tech's not at 100%, I think Clemson wins the game, but I still think Clemson wins the game close, even if Virginia Tech is not at 100%. Michigan at Indiana. What a fun game this is. I love that this is such a premier game. I love that Indiana's as good as they are. And Indiana's a healthy favorite. They are a 14-point favorite Saturday, 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. Question number 1, can Michigan slow down this offense? Indiana's the 3rd-ranked offense in offensive efficiency. But don't look now, Michigan's defense, they're actually pretty vulnerable in certain spots. Now, we know Will Johnson's been banged up. He's been out the last couple weeks. And you look at how Indiana's likely going to attack this Michigan defense, they're not going to hold the ball. Curtis Rourke's going to get rid of the ball really quickly. That's the recipe. When you're playing against Michigan, you already know those 2 defensive tackles can take over the game. You're dead. If you hold the ball, you're dead. So Curtis Rourke's going to get the ball out quick. And you know what Indiana will also do? They will RPO you to death. Just over and over and over again. You get greedy, they take what the defense gives you. Curtis Rourke's extremely disciplined. And I think they're going to create a lot of issues for a Michigan secondary that has been as human as humanly possible. But if Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant get going, look out. They can slow down this offense almost by themselves, but I don't think they will, because I think Curtis Rourke and company understand how this game could become problematic. Question 2, can Indiana's front 7 continue to dominate defensively? Yes, this front 7, if you haven't watched it, you need to take just a little time. I'm not saying you need to go blitz the tape or go watch the coach's copy or the end zone copy in the trenches. Like, I'm not expecting you to do that. But just watch how many difference makers it feels like they have at times. Watch how hard they play. Watch how relentless their effort is. Watch how big they are on the interior. I mean, this is a really physical group. I think Mikael Kamara, number 6, is one of the best players in the country that nobody knows. And if Michigan wins, it's going to be because they ran the ball with great effectiveness against this Indiana group. I don't think it's likely. I look at this Indiana group, I think they're super stingy against the run, and Michigan might try to run right at them, but I don't know how effective that's going to be. This Michigan offensive line, there have been some weeks where they've been good, there have been some weeks where they've been bad, and I just don't know what I'm going to get on a week-to-week basis, and I don't anticipate them playing very good this week. I think Indiana wins, and I think Indiana wins convincingly. I take Indiana, I would lay the points. The Colorado Buffaloes are right there on the cusp of getting into the Big 12 conversation and then ultimately into the college football conversation as well. They are on the road in Lubbock against Texas Tech, where they are a 3.5-point favorite. The total is 62.5. This game is Saturday at 4:00 Eastern time. A couple questions. Question 1, can Shedeur and Travis Hunter wear out a secondary that has a lot of challenges? Now, Texas Tech secondary, they're very human. And this is one of the best passing attacks in college football. Texas Tech secondary is 120th in EPA on pass defense. That's not a good number whatsoever. Triple dig right there when it comes to Texas Tech. And I looked last week, and while they forced an interception last week, they forced a couple bad throws by Rocco Becht for Iowa State. I don't anticipate Shedeur Sanders doing that. I think Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and these wide receivers are going to wear this defense out. And if they get put on islands, I expect Colorado to win those one-on-one matchups pretty much almost all the time. I really feel that strongly about some of the matchups that they can create. Question number 2, can Texas Tech's offense keep up? I think Colorado's going to get theirs. All right, they're going to get theirs. Texas Tech and their opponents have combined to score like 650 points this year. Like in games involving Texas Tech, they've been high scoring. That's been a huge part of the conversation surrounding the Red Raiders. So I think Colorado's going to get theirs because I don't think Texas Tech's defense is going to be good enough in the back end to contain this vaunted passing attack. But can Texas Tech maybe slow the game down a little bit? They have a star in Taj Brooks, their running back. I think he needs 25, maybe 30 carries in this game. They need to junk it up. They need to slow the game down. They need to take the air out of the football. Now, they're not as committed to the run as they probably need to be, especially over the course of this season. Now, they've gotten into some situations where they've gotten behind. But if they can get a good lead and get Taj Brooks going early at running back, that's going to help an awful lot. They also need to make sure that the pass rush for Colorado doesn't have one of those days where they end up being pretty good. Now, that pass rush has been a little up and down this year, a little hit or miss. They blitz a lot. They're not afraid to bring heat. But Baron Morton has been a guy, the quarterback of Texas Tech, he's been a guy that can take advantage if you get too aggressive. He's pretty good against the blitz. So if I were Colorado, I wouldn't be heating it up a lot. I would sell it against the run. I would hope that I can hold up against a decent receiving core, but not an elite receiving core. And I think my weapons on the perimeter are better than your weapons, which is why I think Colorado's got a chance to win this thing convincingly in what I think is a very hostile place. Now, Colorado's 5-0 against the spread in conference play this season. They're one of just 7 programs in the country to cover every conference game, but Texas Tech is 3-0 against the spread as an underdog this season, including 2 wins outright. I don't care. I'm taking Colorado. I think they can expose a secondary that is the weakness of the team, and I think they can create a bit of a track meet in an environment I'm not sure Texas Tech will be able to keep up. The Washington Huskies will travel to State College. Penn State is a 13-point favorite. Over under 46. This game will be Saturday night, 8 o'clock. We got the whiteout. Can Penn State flush their disappointment? There's no secret what it is. Penn State had their heart stripped out last week. Can they flush that disappointment, get back on track against a really stingy Washington football team? Now, Penn State, question number 1, can they have some people step up that aren't named Tyler Warren? Now, we know Tyler Warren at tight end is an amazing All-American candidate, right? But here's one thing that I found interesting. Washington's very good at neutralizing opposing tight ends. Here's a next level stat for you. Washington allows a QBR of 23 when opposing teams target the tight end. That's the 4th best in the country behind BYU, Navy, and UConn. So in the event in which the safety Cam Fabiculanan and this Washington secondary keep Tyler Warren in check, will there be somebody else that steps up on the perimeter for the Buckeyes passing attack? Is it going to be Trey Wallace? Is it Liam Clifford? Is it Amari Evans? Is it whoever? I don't care who it is. Whoever it is needs to step up, win some one-on-ones, because if I'm Washington, I'm preparing for this game, there's 2 things you got to do. Stop the run, stop the tight end, and you're cooking with gas. Going to be tough, but maybe they'll be able to do it here, because at this point, I'm not convinced that Penn State has a weapon outside the tight end room that can take over the game. Question number 2, can Washington's passing attack neutralize Penn State's pass rush? Now, we know Penn State's got dudes up front that can get after you. We know they're going to be really good, and they're going to be able to take advantage of an offensive line that's just been okay this year. But Will Rogers, veteran quarterback there for the Washington Huskies, he's going to get the ball out. The reason why they beat Michigan is because he was getting the ball out in like a second. Every single catch and throw, pretty much everything, and he makes good decisions when he's doing that. They throw in-breaking routes like there's no tomorrow. So I fully anticipate Washington hitting a bunch of in-breaking routes against man coverage, and they try to crease them, and they try to create some big plays. They do have decent wide receivers. Like, I like the wide receivers that they have at Washington. So I think that group collectively pretty decent, but the pass rush for Penn State is probably among the best that Washington's seen this year. Trends in the game, Washington's 4-2 against the spread against AP top 10 teams dating back to last season. I'll take Penn State, but I will also take the points. I think Washington hangs in there and loses this game by single digits, maybe 10 at the most. Final game we'll break down. This is BYU on the road at Utah. BYU is a narrow 4.5 point favorite. The total is low, 41.5. This game is Saturday, 10:15 Eastern time on ESPN. The Holy War is back. Love this game. Back in the conference for the first time since 2010. Both schools at that time were in the Mountain West. So think about how much has changed here in the college football world that these two schools now back in the same league. And that, by the way, was a pretty impressive game. BYU was up 13-0 heading into the fourth quarter, and the Utes rallied to win 17-16. So, in a game that can kind of go in any direction, there is no love lost between these two programs. It should be amazing. This is the 7th time that BYU has gone into the Holy War, ranked in the top 10 in the AP poll. They won each of the previous 6 by an average of 21.8 points per game. So, we'll see. Will that trend hold up? Question 1, can Utah get anything going offensively? They are one of the most imbalanced teams in the country. They're 113th in EPA on offense. They're 9th in APA on defense. I mean, that is an insane gap when you really think about it. But we know that Utah is one-dimensional. But Mekhi Bernard, their running back, is a bruiser. I'm not sold at all on BYU's passing attack, on Utah's passing attack. But I do know that Mekhi Bernard's going to pound away. I fully expect BYU to completely sell it against the run, and I fully anticipate BYU to neutralize that part of the game, because when you look at how BYU's played this year, they do a great job of pinpointing what you do best and making sure you don't beat them with that attribute. So that will be an interesting game of cat and mouse. Question number 2, can BYU win their one-on-one matchups? I think Jake Retzlaff's been one of the great stories of college football so far. I think he's a rock-solid quarterback. I think he's gritty. I think he's got some moxie where he can create, he can buy time, he can get out, he can beat you with his legs. But in this game, it's going to require him staying in the pocket, getting the ball out quickly, and allowing his wide receivers to win one-on-ones. Utah is a team that wants to play deny coverage. They want to play man. They want to press you. They want to be physical. They want to use their length. They want to hope that their pass rush gets home. There's going to be some tight window throws that Retzlaff's going to have to feed the ball into. And while I think Retzlaff's good enough and has developed enough to do that, I do think this is probably the best secondary that BYU has seen this year. So a step up in competition, but at the same time, can Utah manufacture any points against this BYU team? That's going to be the big question mark to me. How many points does it really take for BYU to win? Because if it's a race to 17, Utah can get there. But if it's a race to 28, I don't know if Utah can get there. Trend in the game, BYU is 3-1 against the spread in their last 4 meetings with Utah. I'll take BYU, but I'm expecting a photo finish. I think it's going to be close, really close, perhaps maybe even an at the buzzer field goal. All right, before we get you out of here, I want to give you a couple giant killers just to think about, just some food for thought. Giant killers have been really good this year. So if you just want to interpret it however you want to interpret it, it's totally up to you. But I think there's plenty of opportunities this weekend to find some value on some underdogs in a few different places. Look at Kansas over Iowa State. Iowa State last week got a little bit exposed. How is Kansas only a 3.5 point dog? Doesn't make any sense, which makes me think Vegas is up to something. Iowa State didn't play well last week. People are going to think, oh, they're mad. They're going to go clean things up against Kansas. I think Kansas got a chance to hang. Kansas has talent. They've just lost a million close games. At some point, there's going to be 1 or 2 breaks that bounce their way, and they're going to knock off somebody that's really, really good. Let's go next to North Texas. They're playing against the 25th ranked Army Black Knights. I'm not sold on Army. Army's best win right now has come against a 500 football team. I think North Texas has dudes. I think North Texas has guys that can run and guys that can create in the passing game. So I think North Texas, they can get that one against a ranked Army team. Virginia Tech is against Clemson. Kind of told you already, this is operating under the assumption that Virginia Tech is at 100% from a health standpoint. If they're healthy, they win. If they're not, Clemson will win. I think they're going to be healthy. I think they get the outright upset. And then finally, Washington over Penn State. I've already told you, I think Penn State wins this game. I'm taking Penn State. But man, I don't love it. I don't love it at all, especially if Penn State's licking their wounds a little bit off last week's disappointment. Hey, really appreciate you guys being with us. This has been awesome today. Once again, I appreciate your support as we do the show here from a new location, first time ever, the Atlanta airport. For all of us here at Always College Football, we encourage all of you to like, to rate, to subscribe to the show. We appreciate those of you that have found us on the podcast platform. You're probably going to look at the podcast, look at the ratings, say, wait, 3.5 or 3.6 on the rating. Why would I listen to that? Well, because we were 4.9 or 5.0 until somebody, a specific group of fans of a team that's won one game, decided to sabotage our ratings because they didn't like the fact that their team got left out of the playoff. So it's clearly the podcast fault, not the playoff committee. It's the podcast fault. So our ratings have suffered, but y'all have pushed back, and we very much appreciate those of you that have taken the time to leave us a rating. For all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day here from the Atlanta airport in the Minute Suites in the B terminal. We'll see you on Sunday. It's Always College Football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.